Hello, everyone. Well, Alsumidaie here with the clinical trial Vanguard at the Veeva R&D and Quality Summit here in Copenhagen. And I'm here with the pleasure of Manny Vazquez, who is the Senior Director of Clinical Data Strategy, and Denali Rose, who is the Vice President, Sales and Strategy Site Solutions at Veeva Systems. Pleasure to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to be talking today about eSource. And Manny, my first question to you is, when a site staffer enters a vital sign once and it flows into EDC, sponsor, and EHR without rekeying that data, what specifically breaks in the old workflow that this new eSource workflow fixes?
So I would say that the old workflow was broken to begin with. So whether it's a vital sign data point, whether it's literally any other data point, just the ability for a coordinator at a research site to enter it once and be done and have it go to wherever it needs to go, whether it's EDC, whether it's back to their EHR, whether it's straight through down to the analysis data sets, wherever it needs to go, the ability to just enter it once and be done would be, I think, a game changer in their current workflows.
And Denali, you're regularly engaged with study settings.
Yep.
And what does eSource feel like to a site coordinator in the first month that earlier promises to reduce the site burden, but never really delivered on?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because eSource, the theory, has been around, or a system has been around for a really long time, but it really just was the taking paper and turning it into something electronic. There was no fundamental change for the site, and in fact, it probably added some more work. There might have been some quality controls that helped, but from a site coordinator perspective, from a site perspective, arguably current day eSource doesn't actually provide much efficiency. I think the big differentiator that we're looking at from a Veeva perspective is twofold. One, it's a site-owned solution. So they own, they operate it. It is in their control for their entire portfolio. So they have a single way of working across studies, across sponsors. But the other piece is with the connectivity that Veeva eSource will have with EDC. And it's not just the flow data, where you're taking data from EHR, eSource, to EDC. There's the workflow connectivity with it as well. So you have the sponsors already know data they want collected in their EDC, but having those CRX flow to eSource, so the sites aren't having to recreate those from scratch and build and do that study, ECRF build in their own eSource. They get that automatically. Then the data flows back to the EDC, but then the queries come back to that eSource. So the site is now operating in this one system in a streamlined way for workflows for their data for all of it. So I think there is going to be it could be monumentally significant for how our sites change.
And so not using multiple systems essentially simplifies it for the study sites.
100%. That's a huge problem right now. We've tried to solve site problems by saying, here's a technology, it's going to be great. And we just keep layering it on top, and it just becomes a significant burden on the downstream both what it says.
From a qualitative standpoint, what are site coordinators doing with the hours eSource is giving back to them right now?
Yeah, so the expectation is when they go live on eSource, they get some of that efficiencies. I think the reason a lot of sites are in this business is to take care of patients, provide that care for patients, boots on the ground. So any time you can get back to sites and site staff, they can put back to what matters most, which is doing the actual science and taking care of patients.
Mm-hmm. And I found that when you add support services to sites, I don't have any concrete data on this, but experientially, I found that we've had better patient retention rates because the staff are focusing more on patient engagement, keeping them involved in the trial, being more in touch with the patient rather than doing just the busy work. Is that also the same that you're expect to see from your studies?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think we saw this in the EHR space too, like where providers, when they first went digital, it was really tough and they were tall on computers, and made it better and better, and they could pay more attention to patients. And I always thought that would be similar, especially in clinical trials where patient retention is such a challenge. The more human we can be about it, I think the better our retention rates could be. So from our perspective, we need to get the technology out of the way of that and give them time back for the technology, not detract from that.
And so many sponsors are accountable for data integrity, but historically blind to how sites really capture it. Oftentimes the sites are operating on their own, and it's not until the monitor goes to the site, then they realize, well, the site needs more help, or they needs this or that, right? So how does eSource change what sponsors can actually see and verify through this technology?
Well, I think the fact that you said this in the question, the fact that sponsors historically have been blind to how sites capture source documentation has probably been one of the key cruxes to this challenge for the last 10 to 15 years, that sponsors have been trying to be able to capture this sort of stuff electronically. Because like Denali said, this has been around for a long time, and sponsors have tried to impose on a more study by study basis electronic source tools on sites, but having no idea how sites are actually working. Most sites have their own processes, they have their own SOPs, they do this, they are the responsible party when it comes to collecting source documentation. So they're already doing this on all of this stuff. Anytime that a sponsor historically has imposed an eSource tool on a site for a specific study, all they've really done for the site is they've replaced the EDC entry with the eSource entry, because the site's workflow isn't changing and they're still capturing the source document on paper. So I think from that perspective, the way that we're going about it is more scalable in the sense that it is not a sponsor decision. Sponsors are the beneficiaries for sites that are choosing to do this for themselves, but it's got to be the site who decides they are going to digitize their own process and just build it into their workflow. They are going to connect it to their own EHR if they have that capability. And as far as the sponsor is concerned, it's all direct data capture. And so what that does for a sponsor, as far as what they can see and verify, is it's productized connection. So anything that comes through on the other side at EDC, they know its source. And so it gives them immediate visibility into the source data because it is source data. And they can immediately verify it because it, again, is source data. So you were asking about, what the possible, benefits are, if we've quantified any of that sort of thing, and we haven't yet, but I think we can reasonably assume that there will be significant cost savings in source data verification, because you wouldn't have to do that for the data that comes through this anymore. And on the research site side of things, as we said, anyone who's never been to one would realize that there's a million other things going on at a site, whether it's collecting samples, shipping samples. They're basically a UPS store. There's a million other things. They would really love to not be in digital tools entering data for the sake of the sponsor's benefit. So I think as far as the sponsor's concerned, it's all upside for them.
Let's say that a study coordinator makes a typo. So how would that work from an eSource standpoint?
Well, I would say source data is not necessarily clean data. There's still the need to review and have those types of checks built in. But the workflow, as Denali said, and that's the beauty of the bidirectional capability of the connections that we're implementing, is that when that data does push through to EDC, EDC is still going to do the checks. It's still going to do the validation. And if it does find anything that requires a query, it will trigger it back, and the site will get that feedback and that information in their eSource window. So they can still review what they put in. They can still make an update and say, whoops, that should be 198, not 189, or whatever the case is. And they can submit an update, and it'll function very similarly to how they currently engage with EDC, but now they can just do it all within the source documentation. So there is, again, no need to source verify it. Anything that comes through to EDC is by default source.
I think also too, in having electronic source, if that's one thing, you're not putting your EHR and rekeying it in. I think in that you have just less opportunity just by the design of rekeying something in Rock. You just have it's one time you're entering it versus two. I also think from a paper perspective, if it's paper source versus electronic, there are checks built in that you could build into EDC too. It's something's like ridiculously out of range. So it'll be like you put in blood pressure 300 and AE as opposed to 100 and AE, and it'll say like, just to make sure this is what you wanted. So there'll be some just general quality controls in the system compared to paper where you just put anything down and then you're rekeying that in. So there's just general collection best practices that will increase quality in general, although many play. Source data is not clean data.
For a site or sponsor still running paper or partial digital workflows in 2026, what's the cost of waiting another year to implement eSource?
then it comes back to what we kind of talked about earlier, like the benefit that you get from it, the time you get from with your patients, the time you get to do science. The longer you wait to do that, the less time you have with your patients to do the science, to do why you're doing research. So I think the longer you wait, the less time you're gonna have to go to get to that.
I would agree with that from a research site perspective, particularly as these tools become more accessible. There was kind of a barrier to entry for a long time in terms of just, needing the manpower to implement something, the funds available to afford a tool. So as that becomes more accessible, then I think it's really, this would go for a sponsor as well in any technology, is when the ability to be more efficient and to remove paper and a lot of the challenges that come along with that from your workflow, then you really have to justify why you wouldn't do that. And I think, from a sponsor perspective, again, this is a site-driven change that we're trying to implement here. But the sponsors should also recognize the value that is on the table for them, just as the beneficiary of a site choosing to do this with reduced SDV and the ability to have sites deliver data to them digitally, what they could do with automation and AI built on top of that, just by having all the data digitized at the source at this point. So I think it would be, in the sponsor's best interest as well to encourage their research sites to adopt an eSource strategy, even if they have site engagement teams that are willing to toss them a couple bucks to help them along with the journey. I think it's all upside from a sponsor perspective, because I think we'd all love to see just paper removed, transcription removed, and we can go to a fully end-to-end digital workflow, so we can all build that AI on top of it that we all hope is coming.
And I think too, it's interesting because you mentioned like reducing barriers to entry, and I think SiteVault itself has been designed in a way to do that. Not for all sites, but for any site that's running under 21 trials, there's no cost. So for any site, just like our EISF, just like the CTMS, eSource is following the same model. So not that that's going to change in the future at all, but it's going to be, for any of those sites, it's still zero cost to provide that value to the site. So they should do it now, because there's no barriers to change our lab.
Denali Rose and Manny Vazquez, pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for
Thanks, Bo. Thanks.